tell who they are. They look like everybody else. Complete nonsense. Okay, there are notable physical characteristics. Andre Chikatilo, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Now, take a look at the features, okay? Hooded eyelids, very often a pronounced brow above the eyebrows. High-set cheekbones, very often eyes sunk deep in the eye sockets, okay? Now, who was Andre Chikatilo? Well, he killed upwards of 300 children in Moscow, devoured many of them, okay? Now, I'm running out of time here, but there's something you have to understand. The reptilian overlordship and the reptilian control of the human gene pool make such horrors as the institutionalized global sex slavery, satanic rituals, what goes on at the Bohemian Grove, so on and so forth. It makes it understandable. Because during these, like satanic rituals, for example, these human reptilian hybrids, they're having intercourse. They're having sex orgies with decapitated bodies and disemboweled bodies laying around. Now, to you or I, that's extraordinarily repulsive and horrifying. But to them, it's exactly the opposite. Reptilian human hybrids and serial killers in particular, they get off on inflicting sadistic pain onto others. It's part of the reptilian concept of human ownership. They get off on inflicting pain. They get off on torturing and killing. Ted Bundy, I'll show a picture of him if I can get this mouse working. Ted Bundy, he would be strangling, that's John Wayne Gacy. Well, since I got him up, let me tell you a story. You're probably familiar with his story. Look at, once again, hooded eyelids. In some pictures, you'll see a more pronounced brow, a ridge over his eyebrows. High-set cheekbones. He used to kill and murder little boys and bury them underneath his living room in his house in Chicago. Well, there was a kid who had a very unusual, bizarre pastime. His name was Jason Moss, and he wrote a book called The Last Victim. And Jason Moss used to become pen pals with serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Richard Ramirez and Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, Jason Moss actually got to visit John Wayne Gacy in his prison cell. Now, keep in mind that that was probably the first time John Wayne Gacy had been alone with a young boy, a teenager, since he was doing all the murders. Up to that point in prison, Gacy was the only male contact he had was with his lawyer, prison guards, what have you. Well, anyway, Jason Moss, this stupid kid, goes and sees him in the prison cell. The moment he was alone with John Wayne Gacy, Gacy switched. And he started approaching Jason Moss and said, I'm going to bend you over, F you in your ass, and your blood's going to just leak all over the place, right? And he began reaching down, fondling himself. John Wayne Gacy was fondling himself. Guess what? Nothing, because he's dysfunctional. He's impotent. So some of the things that I mentioned earlier, some of the dynamics involved, were perfectly exemplified in his case, where the first time he'd ever been around a young boy since all his murders, he switches. And you have to understand also that these reptilian human hybrids, they equate sexual gratification with inflicting pain and torture on others. It's all intermeshed with them, okay? And the psychologists bend over backwards to say, oh, it's just a psychological aberration, it's just a psychological disorder. No, there's a genetic basis for it. And some FBI profilers are starting to catch on to that. Okay, Richard Ramirez, high-set cheekbones, eyes set deep in the eye sockets. He was hailing and farewelling Satan before he went off to Disneyland, if you remembered what happened to him in court. Jason Moss was a pen pal of his. Now, I mentioned earlier these astral rapetoids, serial rapetoids. What they can do is they can get to know you just on the internet. They can exchange an email or two with you, but by so doing, they forge the psychic link with you, and they can immediately start coming into your dreamscape, rape you, sodomize you, just terrify you, and varies in sundry ways. Well, Jason Moss was writing him letters, thereby forging that psychic bond. Pretty soon, he started coming into Jason Moss's dreamscape, bending him over, trying to strangle him. I think he probably tried to do more than that. But it just shows you that what I've described has been independently described by others. Okay? He has that ability to astrally leave his body and try to assault somebody who he's only been in pen pal contact with. This is like, I don't know if they have emails anyway, but it was just through letter writing that Jason Moss had maintained communications with this guy. Personally, I'd say get a life. It's this crazy, crazy hobby. Ted Bundy, okay? Here's a good picture. Pronounced brow over his eyebrows, high-set cheekbones. He used to, like many serial murderers, either into ligature, strangling, or they're into blunt force trauma to the skull. He was both of these. He liked to try to have intercourse with his victims and strangle them and watch the life go out of their eyes. That turned him on. The moment of them dying while he was trying to have intercourse with them. He would actually come back to the dump sites where the bodies were months or years later and sexually gratify himself over the decomposed skull or the skulls of his victims. Okay? Again, it's like, it's inhuman. It's just appalling. That's precisely my point. It's inhuman. To describe his behavior merely as some kind of psychological aberration or disorder is way off the mark. Well, I'm running out of time here. How much time do I got? 7 minutes. Well, I'm supposed to leave you with a feel-good thing at the end so you don't leave here with indigestion. So, I never got around to talking about MILABS. Shoot. Well, if you want to talk to me out there sometime before I leave, feel free to talk to me because I have a lot of information about military abductees. In short, they are used as multitask platforms by the deep black elements of the military. Because many of them are hybrids themselves, reptilian hybrids, but also, the Greys and the mantis beings and other ET races have been tampering with the genetics of all these people. They've developed these innate abilities. Sometimes they don't even know they have these abilities. And one quick thing about hosting is a person isn't necessarily hosted by a reptilian. The mantis beings, the Greys, can also host people. Sometimes a troll-like looking demon entity can host people. So it varies. And not only that, though, but some people, we call them a collective. They can be hosted by multiple entities, which is very confusing to a psychic, because one moment they look over and the gal's sitting there and there's a reptile overshadowing her. 10 minutes later, the psychic looks over and now it's a mantis being. Okay? So, again, these people have a genetic predisposition which allows them to be a host for these various entities. Okay. Now, how does this all tie together with the reptilian overlordship and the New World Order? Well, some of you are probably familiar with David Icke's work. Long before David Icke arrived on the scene, shapeshifting had been described by abductees. Very often, reptilians in particular would assume the guise of other aliens, very often blonde Nordic-type aliens. Sometimes they would appear as tall Greys wearing robes. Other times, reptilians would appear as military personnel. So the concept of shapeshifting has been well established in the abduction literature long before David Icke popped up. Now, how does this all tie in? Well, once again, through the control of the human gene pool, the reptilians on a family scale and on a macro scale have ensured that their reptilian human hybrids, some of them with quite advanced psychic abilities, have attained positions of power, not necessarily up front publicly, but in positions of power throughout all strata of society. And we see the bitter fruits of this all around us. We are one more false flag tango operation, as they say, from watching this whole